He left her at birth. Now she's in his boardroom and he has no idea who she is. What happens when a powerful white CEO, who built his empire by burying his past, finds out the brilliant new hire who just exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud is the black daughter he abandoned 23 years ago? Naomi Ellington didn't come to Haltech to settle scores. She came to stand in the room her absence once echoed in. But when the truth starts to unravel from whispered suspicions to a half-sister's innocent questions, everyone begins to realize. This is not just a story about corporate power. It's about what happens when silence is inherited and someone finally dares to speak. Will Naomi destroy the legacy that once erased her? Or will she rebuild something deeper, where truth can finally breathe? What would you do if the father who erased you needed your brilliance to save his reputation? Hit like if this story already has your heart racing. Share with someone who believes justice doesn't always need to scream. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that heal, confront, and empower. Now, let's begin. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the muted overhead lights, its surface pristine except for a single pen uncapped, abandoned near the head chair. The scent of fresh espresso mingled with the subtle notes of lavender from a reed diffuser tucked in the corner of the expansive boardroom. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's skyline stretched like a jagged crown against the gray morning sky. Douglas Halford adjusted his cufflinks with mechanical precision. It was 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes until the quarterly strategic review meeting began. His company, Haltech Security Solutions, had exceeded projections in all but one sector. Still, there were concerns. His COO had been circling like a hawk. The board had grown impatient with legacy leadership. Douglas could feel the quiet pressure tightening like a noose. The door opened softly. She walked in with the composure of someone who knew exactly what room she was in, yet didn't care who doubted she belonged there. Her presence was quiet but undeniable, a slate gray dress suit, crisp but understated. Her natural curls were pulled back into a low bun, revealing a poised, almond-shaped face framed by delicate gold earrings. She set her leather portfolio down on the table and nodded at the seated executives. "Good morning, I'm Naomi Ellington. I'll be walking us through today's performance forecast and risk restructuring model." Douglas's breath caught. He didn't move, but something ancient inside him recoiled like a door swinging open. He thought he'd locked shut decades ago. She hadn't even looked at him yet, and still there was something in her tone, her cadence. Those eyes, he'd only seen them once, just once. But they had haunted him for 23 years. A flash of sterile hospital lights, a tiny, wrinkled infant swaddled in white. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" "Sir, no. That's not my daughter." He had said it calmly, and then he left. Now she was here, speaking, presenting quarterly figures like any other young executive, except she wasn't any other young executive. Douglas shifted in his seat, willing his face into neutrality. Naomi tapped her tablet, and the screen at the end of the room flickered to life. "If you turn to page 8 in your briefing packet," she continued, "you'll see that Q1 returns on infrastructure protection contracts in the federal sector underperformed projections by 6.7%. However, when cross-analyzed with deployment timelines and procurement cycles, the dip is explainable and temporary." Her voice was precise, confident. She didn't rush, didn't waver. She had the room in the palm of her hand, and she knew it. Douglas couldn't look away. There was something about the way she stood, the faint lilt in her voice when she emphasized certain terms, the way she glanced once toward the skyline as if drawing power from the city itself. And then she looked at him. Not for long, maybe 3 seconds, if that. But in those seconds, her amber brown eyes locked with his. He felt naked. She looked away as if nothing had passed between them, as if he were just another man in another suit. But he knew. He knew. Beside him, his assistant Caroline leaned slightly closer. "Mr. Halford," she whispered, "you all right?" He blinked, forcing air into his lungs. "Yes, just listening closely." Naomi continued seamlessly. I recommend we reallocate 15% of discretionary budget to shore up predictive AI capacity before Q2 begins. Given last month's ransomware breach at Westcore, clients are increasingly concerned with internal threat modeling. No notes, no nerves. She had done her homework. Every chart, every margin, every acronym nailed to the decimal. Douglas stared at the nameplate in front of her. Naomi Ellington. Ellington. His last memory of Camille was her sobbing against a rain-slicked cab window, clutching her belly as he walked away. He hadn't heard from her since. No court papers, no calls, just a few months of mailed checks and then silence. He had convinced himself it was better that way. For her, for the baby, for everyone. And now the baby was here, grown, beautiful, detailed, brilliant, and standing in the room like a ghost with a spreadsheet. The meeting wrapped an hour later, ending in polite applause. Naomi smiled graciously as the board chair complimented her poise. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Ellington one-on-one," Douglas said before he could stop himself. Heads turned. Naomi paused in packing her tablet. "Of course," she said evenly. The room emptied slowly. Caroline gave him a strange look before closing the door behind her. Now it was just the two of them. Silence stretched. Douglas cleared his throat. "Miss Ellington, how long have you been with the firm? 7 months?" She didn't sit. "I was recruited after completing my MBA at Yale. Before that, I worked at a cybersecurity startup in D.C." He nodded absently. "Impressive resume." She tilted her head slightly. "Is that why you asked me to stay to review my resume?" He opened his mouth, closed it. She stepped closer, her voice lowered. "Relax, Mr. Halford. I'm not here to cause trouble, a beat, yet." The air turned electric. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a photograph, one aged by time but well-preserved. She placed it gently on the table between them. He didn't need to look. He already knew what it was. "You might not remember," she said softly, "but I remember for both of us." He swallowed hard. "Why now?" he asked, barely more than a whisper. Naomi turned toward the door. "I'll let you know," and then she was gone. Camille Ellington had always hated the cold. But that night, November 18th, 2002, the hospital room was freezing, not just from the air conditioning, but from the absence of something warm, something human, someone who should have been there. She was alone. Sweat dampened her forehead as a nurse pressed her hand gently. "You're doing great, Miss Ellington. Just one more push." Camille gritted her teeth, not from the pain, but from the emotion swelling in her chest. She had labored for 14 hours, and through every contraction, every breathless cry, one thought repeated in her mind. He should have been here. When the final cry pierced the room, a sound so high and shrill and beautiful, Camille sobbed. Not just because her daughter was born, but because she'd done it alone. The nurse smiled. "You have a baby girl." Camille nodded through tears. She already knew. The doctor swaddled the child in a soft pink blanket and placed her gently in Camille's trembling arms. "She's strong," he said, "tiny but full of life." Camille stared down at the baby. Her skin was a warm cinnamon tone, her hair black and soft. But what made Camille inhale sharply were the girl's eyes, amber brown, just like his. A knock came at the door. Another nurse stepped in, holding a clipboard. "There's someone outside, says he's the father." Camille's breath hitched. "Let him in." Douglas stepped into the room like a man caught in a storm coated in guilt, wearing a wrinkled shirt, his tie undone. He didn't come close. He didn't smile. He didn't ask how Camille was doing. Instead, he looked at the child in her arms like she was an invoice he hadn't agreed to receive. "She looks like you," Camille said, voice cracking. Douglas didn't respond. "Would you like to hold her?" the nurse asked kindly. He shook his head. "That's not my daughter." The room fell into silence. Cold, sterile, judgmental silence. The nurse looked between them. "Sir, this is a hospital. We don't make assumptions." "No." Douglas interrupted. Check again. Camille's tears burned her cheeks. I told you, she whispered. She's yours. But Douglas was already backing toward the door. His hands shook, his lips tightened, and then he was gone. Camille held her daughter tighter and whispered a name into the silence, Naomi. 2 days later, Camille sat in the hospital cafeteria, a paper cup of lukewarm tea growing cold in her hands. Her best friend Serena sat across from her, arms crossed, protective fury in her eyes. You should sue him, Serena said flatly. Get child support, get every dollar he owes. Camille shook her head. Don't think I haven't thought about it, she said. But I don't want him forced to be a father. That's not the kind of love I want for my child. Serena scoffed. You're too kind for your own good. Camille sipped her tea. No, she said slowly. I'm just tired of begging men to show up. That night, she cradled Naomi against her chest, whispering stories into the stillness. She promised her daughter a life of dignity, of quiet strength, of love that didn't have to be earned through suffering. I can't give you a father, she whispered, but I will give you everything I have. In the months that followed, a few checks came in the mail, always unsigned, always in bland envelopes. Camille never spent them. She tucked them away in a folder, marked with the words, for Naomi. By the time Naomi turned 3, the checks stopped, and Camille, true to her word, never called, never chased, never sued. Instead, she worked double shifts at the hospital, sometimes sleeping in the break room. Just to afford Naomi's asthma medication and pay for childcare, they lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Yonkers. The ceiling leaked every spring. The heater groaned every winter. But there was music in that apartment. Laughter, books, bubbles in the bathtub, hugs that meant something. Naomi never asked about her father, not until she was 10. They were at the grocery store. Naomi pointed to a man helping his daughter pick cereal and asked, Why don't I have a dad like that? Camille had crouched down, brushing Naomi's curls behind her ear. You do have a dad, she said gently. But he didn't know how to be one. Some people don't. Naomi had simply nodded. But later that night, Camille found her asleep in bed, clutching a drawing of a stick figure family. 2 people, holding hands with a smaller one between them. Years passed. When Naomi was 13, she had a severe asthma attack at school. Camille rushed from work, still in scrubs, heart pounding. The doctor said she'd almost stopped breathing. Camille cried quietly in the ER waiting room. That was the night she decided to quit night shifts and enroll in a part-time medical research program. She needed to understand chronic illness better for Naomi. She wanted to give her daughter a future that didn't revolve around fear. She never remarried. But she raised Naomi with the kind of love that didn't make headlines, the kind that made sandwiches before school, that ironed college interview outfits at midnight, that sat through every school play, even the awkward ones with cardboard trees. By the time Naomi turned 16, she had become fiercely self-reliant, introverted but insightful. Her grades were stellar, her sense of humor dry but warm. One rainy Saturday, Camille returned from work to find Naomi at the kitchen table, a folder of old letters and documents spread before her. Why didn't you tell me he ran away? Camille froze. I found the checks, Naomi said. His name was on the bank slips. I wasn't hiding him, Camille said softly. I was protecting you. Naomi looked up, and her voice, though calm, held something deeper. I want to know who he is. Camille hesitated. I don't want to see him. Naomi clarified. I just want to understand. Camille sat beside her, took her hand. If you go looking, she said, be sure you're ready for the answers. Naomi nodded. She already was. Naomi Ellington didn't grow up dreaming of revenge. She dreamed of scholarships, of fresh paper and sharpened pencils, of breath that came easy and nights without inhalers wheezing beside her bed, of her mother, asleep on the sofa with medical textbooks sprawled across her chest, the TV still playing softly. She dreamed of being enough, Even when she didn't say it out loud, she carried the weight of being left behind like a folded note pressed into the lining of her coat, always there, close to the skin. By 17, Naomi had stopped asking questions about Douglas Halford. She had, however, learned everything about him that she could find online. She knew he was the CEO of Haltech Security Solutions, a multi-million-dollar firm specializing in corporate and government-level data security. She knew he had remarried a woman named Elaine. She knew he had a daughter named Sophie, born when Naomi was 14. She knew he gave interviews about integrity and leadership and building a legacy through values. The irony didn't sting anymore. It just lit a quiet fire in her. It began as curiosity, but over time, curiosity became resolve. At 18, she received a full ride to Howard University, majoring in computer science and applied economics. Camille cried when the letter came. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick. "You opened the door we couldn't afford to knock on." Howard became more than a school, it became a mirror, a place where Naomi discovered she was not alone in her silence. She met other students who'd grown up missing fathers or being the only Black girl in advanced science courses, or being told they were intense when they were simply prepared. There, she learned two important truths. One, knowledge is leverage. Two, leverage is most powerful when it's quiet. In sophomore year, Naomi took a graduate-level course in cybersecurity ethics. The professor, an ex-intelligence analyst, whose eyes was blunt and brilliant. He once told the class, "If you want to challenge a system, you don't yell at its door. You learn its language. You walk in through the side and rearrange the furniture." Naomi took that personally. So while other students polished resumes for Google or Deloitte, Naomi researched Haltech's summer internships. She tailored her transcript, curated a minimalist portfolio, applied under a slightly altered name, Naomi Ellington. No one blinked. Her first day at Haltech was surprisingly ordinary. The HR rep handed her a temporary badge, a slim laptop, and a packet of logins. No one recognized her last name. No one connected her calm, quiet energy to anything threatening. And Douglas. He hadn't even noticed her, not yet. She spent the first 4 months building credibility. She said little in meetings but asked smart questions. When she did speak, it was with clarity and care. She stayed late. She cross-checked code. She learned the organizational chart like scripture. She never skipped a step, because Naomi wasn't improvising. She was orchestrating. Her plan wasn't built on anger, it was built on intention. She wasn't here to scream. She was here to be undeniable. At night, in her one-bedroom sublet in Harlem, she journaled. She wrote about her mother's hands, cracked and steady from years of scrubbing hospital walls and braiding her daughter's hair. She wrote about Marcus, the man who had married Camille when Naomi was 6 and stayed until cancer took him when she was 12. He had been the kind of father who showed up with school snacks, who taught her to ride a bike by whispering, "I'm still here," even when he'd already let go of the seat. She wrote about what it felt like to sit across from Douglas in meetings, this man who didn't even flinch when he saw her face. He looked through her like she was glass. That hurt more than any rejection letter ever could. One afternoon, while auditing past digital correspondence logs for a small security breach, Naomi stumbled upon an archived email Douglas had sent nearly 20 years ago. Subject line, RE payment transfer, child account. Her chest tightened, she clicked it. A single sentence closed the account. "There will be no further transfers, do not contact me again." It was dated 6 months after she was born. Naomi sat still for a long time. Then she printed it, folded it, slid it into the same folder where she kept a copy of her birth certificate and a photo of Camille cradling her as a newborn. She didn't cry. She simply said aloud, "Noted." 3 weeks later, Naomi presented her first full-scale internal audit before the finance committee. She made strategic suggestions that saved the company nearly $1.2 million in risk leakage. Douglas commended her without looking her in the eye. And that's when she knew he still didn't recognize her. Somewhere inside her, a knot loosened, and it was humiliating, Zastas, and liberating. She was no longer a ghost from his past. She was a woman from his future, and she was here, whether he liked it or not. But even Naomi wasn't immune to questions that came late at night. in the quiet moments after brushing her teeth or folding laundry. What would she actually say to him? Would she show him the photo? Ask him why? Would she yell? Would she forgive? Would she want anything from him at all? The scariest question wasn't what he would do. It was what she might become if she let herself feel everything she'd buried. She thought about Camille, the way she'd once said, if love requires proof, then it isn't love, it's performance. Naomi didn't want to perform. She wanted to reveal, not just who she was, but who he had become. Because if he could look her in the eye and still turn away, then she'd know everything she ever needed to know. Douglas Halford hadn't always been a man haunted by silence. There was a time when he moved through boardrooms like a storm, confident, commanding, crisp in speech and suit. But lately, the world seemed to echo. Even his own footsteps down the marbled hallway outside his office sounded too loud, too hollow. He'd grown accustomed to control, deadlines, projections, numb people, but Naomi Ellington. She had unseated something in him that refused to settle back into place. The morning after their private exchange in the boardroom, Douglas sat alone in his office, watching the steam curl off his untouched coffee. Manhattan pulsed beyond the window, the city never slowing, never hesitating. He tapped his pen against the table, then swiped open his phone. He searched the name again. Naomi Ellington. Her LinkedIn profile had over a dozen endorsements. MBA from Yale, dual majors from Howard, internship at Cybercore, fellowship in risk analytics. And yet, nothing personal. No photos, no quotes, no birthday, just her work, polished, detached. He should have known from the moment she spoke, from the way her eyes lingered not with admiration, but assessment. Douglas sat back and tried to remember her mother's voice. Camille had always spoken with clarity, never shrill, never dramatic, just honest, direct. That same tone lived in Naomi. It sliced through him. His phone buzzed with a message from Elaine. Don't forget, Sophie's piano recital at 6 tonight. She practiced all week, you promised. He read the words 3 times before replying, I'll be there. But he wasn't sure that was true. His mind, his guilt was somewhere else. He pulled open the drawer beside him and retrieved a slim black folder marked Confidential. Inside was Naomi's onboarding paperwork from 7 months ago. He flipped through. Date of birth, November 18, 2002. Mother's name, Camille Ellington. Emergency contact, NA. Douglas exhaled sharply. No mention of a father, no siblings, no next of kin. It was like she'd walked into his world of phantom, no roots, no strings, except he was the string. He closed the folder and stared at the family photo on his desk. Him, Elaine, and Sophie last Christmas, matching scarves. Elaine's hand on his chest. Sophie smiling, gap-toothed and radiant. He loved his daughter. He was a good father now, but the timeline. Sophie had been born almost 15 years after Naomi. There were no overlaps, no complicated weekends or child support disputes, just one clean erasure followed by a tidy reinvention, or so he'd told himself. For 23 years, he had performed fatherhood like a well-rehearsed monologue. But Naomi wasn't a script he'd written. She was the line he skipped, the chapter he pretended didn't exist. He remembered that night in the hospital, not in sharp detail, but in fragments. Camille's tears, his own panic, his father's voice echoing in his head. A man doesn't throw his whole future away for a mistake. Douglas. His mother had sat silent at the dinner table that night, quietly folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. He'd told Camille the next day that it wasn't about her, that he wasn't ready, that the world wasn't ready. But the truth was much simpler. He was afraid of what his parents would think, afraid of losing his promotion, afraid of explaining a mixed-race baby to a family who still flinched at certain neighborhoods. So he chose the easiest path. He disappeared. And now the past had arrived in his conference room with a 17-slide audit presentation and a flawless recommendation on market diversification. Worse, she was good. Not good for her age or good for a woman. She was better than most of the men he'd mentored for years. She had presence. She had precision. She had his eyes. He leaned back and closed his own. The guilt wasn't new. It had always been there, creeping in during quiet drives, interrupting holidays, tugging at him during Father's Day brunches when Sophie would present him with handmade cards that said, "Best Dad Ever." He had smiled, bright, but deep down, he always knew the title wasn't fully his. Douglas opened his calendar and clicked to Naomi's next scheduled meeting. Budget review, Thursday 2nd p.m. He clicked Add Guest, then paused. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. What did he even want from her? A conversation, an apology or forgiveness. Did he even deserve to ask? At noon, he walked to the executive lunchroom, but nothing on the menu seemed edible. He grabbed a bottled water and walked past Naomi in the hallway by accident, if it was an accident. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't greet him, but her eyes met his. For 2 seconds, that was all. But it felt like standing too close to a fire you didn't know was lit. He almost said her name. Almost, but didn't. That night, he made it to Sophie's recital late. She was already sitting on the piano bench when he slipped into the back row of the school auditorium, still wearing his Haltech badge. Elaine gave him a small look, not quite scolding, just tired. Sophie's fingers moved over the keys like a story unfolding. Douglas clapped when it ended, too loudly. Sophie saw him and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Later, in the car, Sophie spoke softly. "Dad." "Yes, Bug." "Why do you look sad?" He gripped the steering wheel. "I just made some mistakes when I was younger," he said. Sophie nodded as if that explained everything. Maybe to her. It did. But Douglas knew better. That night, he stared at the ceiling in bed while Elaine slept beside him. And he thought, for the first time, not about what it would cost him if the truth came out, but what it had already cost Naomi. Thursday at 2 p.m. arrived like a pressure drop before a storm. Douglas Halford sat in his office with his blazer folded neatly on the back of his chair, sleeves rolled up, palms sweating. A man like him didn't like being caught off guard, but for the last few days, that's exactly what Naomi Ellington had done. And now, she'd accepted his invitation to meet. No agenda, no topic, just an email from her that morning. "Understood. I'll stop by at 2. No exclamation points, no smiley faces, just deliberate calm." That calm unnerved him more than outrage would have. He looked around the room, suddenly aware of how everything in it reflected his carefully curated image leather chairs, mahogany desk, awards displayed in symmetrical rows. Even the window blinds were programmed to adjust to the optimal lighting for productivity. And yet, nothing in this space could prepare him for the woman he had once left in a hospital nursery without looking back. At exactly 2:01, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," he said, clearing his throat. Naomi entered. She wore navy blue tailored quiet power, no jewelry, no notes, no nervous smile. "Ms. Ellington," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Thank you for making time." She sat but didn't relax, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap, posture precise. "I assume this isn't about budget allocation," she said. He tried to chuckle but stopped. It wasn't funny. "No," he said, "it's not." A long pause settled between them. In the distance, the hum of city traffic filtered through double-paned windows. Even the air felt like it was waiting. "May I ask?" he said gently. "When you found out," Naomi didn't blink. "About you, I've always known who you were. Mom told me when I was 16. But I started preparing for this moment 2 years before that." His breath caught. "Preparing, I learned how to code when I was 11. She continued, "I got my first internship at 15. I chose my universities based on where your company recruited interns." Douglas leaned forward. "You planned this." Naomi nodded. "I didn't want revenge. Mr. Halford, I wanted presence. I wanted to stand in front of you and not have to wonder what it would feel like." He ran a hand through his hair. "I had no idea." He muttered. That much was obvious. She replied, tone neutral. He looked at her, really looked now. She had Camille's cheekbones, his eyes, A quiet storm brewing beneath her stillness, and that dimple on the left cheek it only surfaced when she was trying not to show emotion. "Does Camille know you're here?" he asked. Naomi's expression flickered. "She told me not to do this, said it would only open wounds. But I told her some wounds don't heal just because we pretend they aren't there." Douglas exhaled. "You have every right to hate me." "I don't," she said, shaking her head. "Hate takes too much energy. I used that energy to become someone you couldn't ignore." That cut deeper than she probably intended. He nodded slowly. "You succeeded." They sat in silence again. A different silence now. Less electric, more tragic. Douglas swallowed the lump forming in his throat. "Can I ask you something personal?" Naomi shrugged. "You can ask." He hesitated. Did you grow up happy?" Her jaw tightened. "That depends on your definition." "I was loved. I had a stepfather who taught me how to swim, how to tell the truth even when it hurt. I had a mother who worked double shifts and still managed to braid my hair every school night. So yes, I grew up loved." She paused. "But I also grew up with a nebulizer on my nightstand and a mother who cried quietly in the kitchen over hospital bills. I grew up watching Father's Day commercials and wondering what I'd done wrong to be left out of the story." Douglas bowed his head. "I'm sorry." "Are you?" she asked. "Not cruelly, genuinely. Or are you just sorry I showed up?" "That stung?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Both, maybe, but I am sorry, truly." Naomi sat back. "I didn't come to destroy you." She said, "Not yet." Douglas looked up sharply. Yet she met his eyes. "I came to see if you were the man who ran or someone different. So far, I'm undecided." He rubbed his face. "Why now?" he asked. "Why show up after all these years?" "Because I'm tired of carrying the silence alone," she said. "And because I wanted to give you a chance to do something different before I decided what comes next." That filled him with a deeper dread than anything else. "What do you mean?" "What comes next?" Naomi stood, smoothing her skirt. Her voice remained soft but firm. "You have 2 daughters now, Mr. Halford, but only one of them knows the whole story." She turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "Oh, and Douglas," she added without turning around, "you might want to check your investment logs. There's a particular algorithm flag on Sector 5 you've overlooked for the past 3 quarters. I'd fix that before the board asks questions." The door closed gently behind her. Douglas sat frozen, her final words ringing in his ears. She wasn't just his daughter. She was a threat, a mirror, a reckoning in heels. And she knew exactly what she was doing. The Halford home sat on a quiet street in a leafy part of Westchester, just far enough from Manhattan to feel like a different world. Painted in soft gray with white trim, it was the kind of place that looked like stability. 2-car garage, white porch swing, hydrangeas in bloom. Inside, Elaine Halford was folding laundry on the living room couch while Sophie lay on the rug nearby, drawing constellations with glitter pens. "Did you see this one?" Sophie said, holding up her paper. "It's called The Whispering Crown. I made it up." Elaine smiled. "It's beautiful." "What's the story behind it?" Sophie launched into a tale about a queen who lost her voice and had to communicate with stars. Her voice was animated, hands moving like fireworks. Elaine watched her daughter and felt the usual swell of gratitude. She had a good life, a quiet life, the kind she once prayed for in her 20s. Back when she used to wait tables and draw abstract figures on napkins during slow shifts, she and Douglas had met at a networking event 12 years ago. He was already successful, calm in a way she found magnetic. He talked about security systems and data infrastructure like they were poetry. She talked about modern sculpture and once having a dog named Banjo. They had nothing in common. But something had clicked. They married a year later, had Sophie 3 years after that, and Douglas had been good. Not overly emotional, but present, steady, protective. He missed a few recitals but brought home books and built science projects together. He made lists and laminated them, Sophie adored him, which is why Elaine had noticed, almost immediately, when something shifted. At dinner, she pushed roasted vegetables around her plate while Sophie chattered about school. Douglas nodded along, but his eyes were somewhere else. Doug, Elaine asked gently. He blinked. I said the boiler's making that thumping sound again. We probably need to call someone. Right, yes, sorry, I'll handle it. But he didn't write it down. And Douglas always wrote things down, later, after Sophie was in bed. Elaine curled up next to him on the couch, a nature documentary played on mute in the background. You've been quiet lately, she said, even for you. He didn't look away from the screen. Just work stress. Elaine paused. Is it that new analyst you mentioned? Douglas stiffened almost imperceptibly. You said she made some good suggestions, but seemed a little intense. He nodded. Yes, she's sharp. Elaine watched him carefully. You said her name was Naomi Ellington, he said quickly. There was a beat of silence too long to be natural. Elaine tilted her head. Do you know her? His breath caught, just slightly, and I know, of her. She's been making waves in our department. Elaine didn't push, but something settled in her chest, cold and tight. The next afternoon, Sophie sat at the kitchen table working on a school project. Elaine leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Sweetheart, she said, what do you think it means when someone you love doesn't tell you something important? Sophie looked up, like a surprise. No, not a fun surprise, like a big, real thing. Sophie frowned in concentration. Is it like when someone says they're fine, but they're actually really sad? Elaine smiled softly. Yes, kind of like that. Sophie set her pencil down. Then I think you should ask them why. And maybe tell them it hurts. Elaine's eyes watered unexpectedly. Thank you, she said. Sophie shrugged. That's what Dad says. Ask directly, assume nothing. Elaine turned away so her daughter wouldn't see her face twist with emotion, because Douglas Halford was not a man who shared by accident, and whatever had turned his face pale at dinner 2 nights ago, whatever had hollowed his voice was not just work stress. That evening, when Sophie was brushing her teeth, Elaine stood in the hallway, scrolling through her iPad. Curiosity got the better of her. She typed in Naomi Ellington Haltech. The search returned a few public results, mostly academic. Yale, Howard, internship accolades. Then she found something else, a photo from a company retreat, half blurred but clear enough. Naomi standing beside Douglas, not close, not casual. But the resemblance, Elaine stared at the screen. Her skin, her eyes, her face. It was there. It was undeniable. Douglas came home late again. Elaine met him at the door. I need you to tell me the truth, she said quietly. He stiffened. About what about Naomi? He didn't speak, didn't lie, didn't run. He just looked at her, and Elaine saw it clear as glass. Oh my God, she whispered. She's yours. Douglas's voice was barely audible. I didn't know she worked for me. Not until last week. Elaine backed up, crossing her arms, and now she confronted me. Privately. Does Sophie know? No, no one knows. Just you. And Camille. At the mention of another woman's name, his former lover Elaine's stomach turned. I thought I knew everything. She said, I thought I buried it. I'm your wife. She snapped. I'm not your damage control. Douglas's shoulders sagged. I didn't mean for any of this to touch you or Sophie, but it does. Elaine cried. It already has. Sophie's footsteps appeared at the top of the stairs. Mom, Dad. They both froze. Elaine smoothed her tone. It's okay, baby. Go back to bed. But Sophie didn't move. Is Naomi my sister? A silence heavier than anything fell over the hallway. Douglas closed his eyes. Elaine's face crumpled, and Sophie just stood there, small but wide-eyed, holding the truth like a glass figurine she didn't mean to drop. Naomi sat at her desk, staring blankly at a line of code, Outside her glass-walled office, the hum of Haltech continued as usual, emails flying, phones ringing, executives pacing in power strides. But Naomi wasn't part of that rhythm today. She was sitting in the eye of the storm she had quietly engineered, watching the chaos shift around her. She hadn't planned for Sophie. She hadn't planned for a child's voice in the hallway asking, "Is Naomi my sister?" That part pierced through her more than she expected, because Naomi had been that child once asking about a father who never came home, and now, without intending to, she had passed that confusion onto a little girl who didn't deserve it. Her phone buzzed. A new meeting invite board inquiry session Monday, 10:00 a.m. required. Submitted by Lauren Vance. COO Naomi's jaw tightened. Lauren, the man who'd given her that faux friendly smile in her second week and said, "We're thrilled to have you on board, especially with such a unique background." The man who once told her in a closed-door chat, "Some people think diversity is about optics. I prefer performance." Naomi had smiled and logged every word. Lauren Vance was exactly the kind of man who pretended to value inclusion while undermining it behind sleek language and plausible deniability. And now, he was circling her like a hawk. Douglas watched from his office as Naomi exited the elevator and made her way to the upper-level conference suite. She walked with her usual measured confidence, but he could see it, the tension in her shoulders, the silence behind her eyes. She knew, he knew. And so did Lauren. The inquiry session wasn't officially labeled as disciplinary, but everyone in the room knew what it was. Lauren opened with his trademark charm, the smile he wore like a tailored jacket. "Naomi," he said, "we wanted to speak with you today to clarify a few things. Your recent algorithm flagged a $12 million discrepancy in our Sector 5 logs. That's no small matter." Naomi nodded. "I submitted my findings to the audit team. All documentation is timestamped and version locked." Lauren smiled wider. "Yes, and we appreciate that. But what we're trying to understand is, how did this go unnoticed for 3 quarters? And more importantly, how did you catch it so quickly when others didn't?" Douglas shifted in his seat but said nothing. Naomi folded her hands. "I wasn't trained to overlook patterns," she said simply. "I was trained to follow them." There was a soft murmur of approval from 2 junior board members, but Lauren pushed on. "There are whispers." He said, casually, that your position was fast-tracked, that someone upstairs took a particular interest in your advancement. There it was. The accusation wrapped in civility. Douglas opened his mouth, but Naomi raised a hand slightly, silencing him without looking. "I'm not here because someone favored me," she said calmly. "I'm here because I earned it. If there are questions about that, I suggest we open everyone's hiring files, not just mine." Silence. Lauren cleared his throat. "I also noticed," he said slowly, "that you've had a few private meetings with Mr. Halford. Anything the board should be aware of?" Naomi turned her head and looked Douglas in the eye. For the first time, she let something flicker in her expression. Not anger, not threat, just awareness. Douglas felt it like a weight on his chest. "No," she said. "Nothing the board needs to worry about. Not yet." The words hung in the air like smoke. After the meeting, Douglas caught up with her near the elevators. "Naomi," he said softly. "That was a test. She finished." "One I expected." He looked at her carefully. "You didn't tell them." "Why would I?" she said. "Do you think I want to be the headline, 'CEO's abandoned daughter joins company, discovers fraud, family implodes'?" Douglas winced. "I wouldn't let that happen." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You already did." She stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, she looked at him and said, "You think the truth is a bomb, but sometimes it's a spotlight. I haven't turned it on yet, but I will, if I have to." The doors slid shut. That evening, Naomi sat on a bench outside the central library, the city buzzing around her. She hadn't told Camille what happened. Not yet. She needed to breathe first, to process, to remember that power didn't always mean volume, that the strongest voices were the ones that didn't need to scream. She thought about Sophie again, her little half-sister with her galaxy drawings and soft questions. What would happen to her when this all unraveled? Would she be okay? Would she blame Naomi? Or would she, someday? Understand Naomi didn't know, but she knew this if she didn't protect the truth now. It would turn into a weapon someone else could wield, and that she would never allow. In his home office, Douglas sat staring at an old email draft he had never sent. Subject line to the daughter I never held. It had no body, no words, just the blinking cursor, pulsing like a heartbeat he couldn't hear. He closed the laptop. His phone buzzed, a text from Elaine. You need to talk to Sophie. She's not sleeping. She has questions, and I can't answer them anymore. Douglas sat back, eyes closed. The test wasn't over. It had only just begun. Friday morning at Haltech didn't feel like Friday. It felt like something cracked had begun to spread. People passed each other in the corridors with lowered voices. Slack messages were being screenshot. Naomi noticed her inbox suddenly filling with follow-up requests from directors she'd never spoken to before. Everyone was sniffing for something, though no one was bold enough to name it. That was how corporate collapse began, not with explosions, but with shifts. Small ones, cold ones, quiet ones. Naomi kept her head down, typing steadily, reviewing logs from the flagged Sector 5 portfolio. She was meticulous, as always. But behind every click was something else now in awareness. She was being watched, targeted, measured. By people who had never even asked where she went to high school, but who now questioned whether she belonged here at all. She wasn't surprised. This, too, had been predicted. In the executive suite, Douglas sat at the edge of his desk while Lauren Vance hovered near the window. Arms crossed. You knew, Lauren said flatly. Didn't you? Douglas didn't answer. Lauren smirked. The resemblance is unsettling. Douglas stood. That's none of your business. Oh, but it is, Lauren said, turning to face him. Because if you're playing favorites with an undisclosed family member, you've jeopardized every compliance protocol we have. She earned her place. Lauren leaned in. That's not the point. The optics alone will destroy you. Douglas stared back, jaw clenched. What do you want? Lauren smiled coolly. A smooth transition. Your exit. Quiet. Clean. With a press release that makes it sound like you're pursuing new opportunities. Douglas's stomach dropped. You're pushing me out. Lauren's shrug was unapologetic. You brought the rot inside the walls. Douglas, I'm just cleaning up. Naomi sat in her car after work, gripping the steering wheel but not turning the key. Her hands were shaking, not from fear but from control. She was holding herself together with thread, and thread was never meant to carry this much weight. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring. Then another buzz this time, a voicemail. She pressed play. It was Camille, Naomi. Baby, I just got a call from someone claiming to be from the press. They're asking about Douglas, about you. I didn't say anything, but be careful. This is bigger than just your story now. They're digging. Naomi closed her eyes. Her mother had stayed silent for 23 years. And now, her peace was unraveling because Naomi had chosen to step into the room where silence was policy. Her heart hurt, not with regret, but with pressure. The weight of all the truths she'd tried to carry without making noise. That night, back in Westchester, Elaine found Douglas standing in the kitchen in the dark, staring at the refrigerator like he didn't know why he was there. You need to talk to her, she said softly. Sophie, he asked. Elaine nodded. She's not eating. She asked me if her sister didn't like her. Douglas exhaled like the weight of the air itself was too much. I don't know how to explain what I did, he whispered. Elaine came closer, voice gentler. You don't have to explain. You just have to show up. That's what fathers do. That's what you didn't do before. He turned to her. She hates me, he said. Naomi. Maybe. Elaine said, Or maybe she's been hoping just once that you'd finally choose her. The next morning, Haltech's internal system flagged a data integrity warning tied to external media inquiries. An article draft, unpublished, but circulating. Hidden ties and rising tensions at Haltech analyst. Accused of manipulating CEO Naomi, read the headline 3 times before her hands moved. She traced the metadata. It had been leaked, not by a journalist, by someone inside. She opened the author tag, L. Vance. Lauren was trying to pin everything on her accusations of internal leaks, financial tampering, nepotism. Naomi's pulse quickened, but she didn't panic. She copied the file, created a secure backup, and then she did something she hadn't done in years. She opened the folder marked Dad. Inside the hospital photo, the unopened letters, the financial email, the rejection checks, and a document she'd never read, her mother's letter to Douglas, never sent. She opened it. If you ever wonder who she became, she's strong. She's the kind of strong that doesn't yell, the kind that listens, then acts. She doesn't ask for anything because she learned not to. But that doesn't mean she didn't need you. I forgive you, but I hope someday you stop asking if you were wrong and start asking what you'll do about it. Naomi's breath caught. Her mother had written that the week she started kindergarten, and Douglas had never read it, but now he would. That night, Naomi dropped a small envelope at Douglas's door, no return address. Inside one photo, one letter, and a single line written in Naomi's careful hand. This isn't a threat, it's a mirror. Haltech wasn't crumbling yet, but the scaffolding was shaking. Lauren had drawn his sword, the press was circling, and Naomi was done whispering. She wasn't here to burn the house down. She was here to rebuild the foundation. But she'd do it on her terms. No permission, no apology, no more silence. Sophie Halford stood in the upstairs hallway, holding her iPad like a piece of evidence. She'd overheard the whispers, the name Naomi slipping through cracks in conversations her parents thought were private. She'd seen her mom cry into the sink and her dad stare at nothing for minutes at a time. And now, she had done what any 9-year-old with access to Wi-Fi and a sense of curiosity would do. She Googled Naomi Ellington, and what she found didn't make sense, not at first. There were articles about her accomplishments, a few photos from company events, then a discussion thread, half deleted with speculation CEO's daughter, same eyes, he knew. She's the reason he's stepping down. Sophie didn't know what stepping down meant in business, but she knew what it meant when someone hid something. She'd once broken a vase in the living room and told her dad the wind knocked it over. He didn't yell. He just looked disappointed. Now, it was her turn to feel that way, not because she'd done something wrong, but because something had been kept from her, downstairs. Elaine was chopping vegetables for dinner when Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Mom," she asked, holding out the iPad. Elaine wiped her hands, eyes narrowing as she read the screen. She exhaled. "Where did you see this?" "I looked it up," Sophie said, "because you wouldn't tell me, and neither would Dad." Elaine knelt down, placing her hands on Sophie's shoulders. "Honey, some things are complicated, but is she my sister?" Elaine paused, then nodded. "Yes, Naomi is your sister." Sophie blinked. "So why don't I know her?" Elaine sat down on the floor, pulling Sophie into her lap, because, a long time ago, before Daddy met me, he made a mistake. He didn't stay. He should have, but he didn't. Did he love her? Elaine's throat tightened, and I don't know. But he missed the chance to find out. Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "Do you think she hates me?" "No, baby." Elaine said, "She doesn't hate you. Then can I meet her?" That evening, Douglas came home later than usual. His face was pale. His tie loosened. There was an envelope in his briefcase he hadn't opened yet. The one Naomi had left at his office door. Elaine met him in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "You need to talk to her," she said. Douglas sighed. "Naomi." "No," Elaine said. "Your daughter. The one who's been waiting all week to understand what's happening?" He stared at her. "Sophie knows she's 9. Douglas, not invisible." He sat at the table, rubbing his eyes. "I don't even know what to say." "Then tell the truth, for once." They sat on the back porch. The evening was warm, the sky brushed with lavender and orange. Sophie curled beside him on the bench, legs swinging off the side. "You lied," she said quietly. Douglas didn't defend himself. "I did." Why he looked at her, truly looked. Because I was afraid. I thought if I told you about Naomi, you'd think less of me. That your mom would leave. That the world I built with you would fall apart. Sophie stared straight ahead. Did you ever think about Naomi's world? Douglas winced. "I do now, every minute. She's really smart," Sophie said. "I saw her name in an article about your company. People are saying she might be better at your job than you." Douglas chuckled, despite the ache in his chest. "She might be." Sophie turned to him. "Can I meet her?" Douglas blinked. "You want to?" "She's my sister, isn't she?" He nodded. I think she should decide. But I'll ask." Sophie smiled faintly. "Okay." Then she rested her head on his arm. "I'm not mad, but I wish you trusted me." Douglas kissed her forehead. "I'll try harder, from now on." The next morning, Naomi awoke to a text she didn't expect. From unknown number: "Hi, this is Sophie. Dad gave me your number. I hope that's okay. Can I meet you? I want to see what a big sister is like." I already made a list of questions. One is about stars. Another is about if you had braces. Naomi stared at the screen for a long time. Then she replied, "Hi, Sophie. I'd like that." They met at the Botanical Gardens on Sunday. Neutral ground, public, peaceful. Naomi arrived early, heart pounding, though she didn't show it. Sophie ran up the path, her curls bouncing, a notebook in her hand. Naomi crouched to greet her. "Hi." "Hi," Sophie said breathlessly. "I brought snacks." Naomi smiled. "Thank you." Sophie opened her notebook. "Okay, first question, did you ever win a science fair?" Naomi laughed. "Once, in 6th grade, I built a working model of a lung. It even wheezed." Sophie's eyes went wide. "That's so cool." Douglas and Elaine sat at a distance, watching the two girls talk like they'd always known each other. Douglas leaned into his wife's shoulder. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Elaine nodded. "But maybe Naomi does." As the sun dipped lower, Naomi handed Sophie a folded paper. "What's this?" the girl asked. "A star map." Naomi said, "Of the Whispering Crown. I heard you invented it." Sophie beamed. "You remembered?" Naomi nodded. "I think it's the kind of story people should keep telling." That night, Naomi walked home under the stars. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about what she'd lost. She was thinking about what might still be possible. Not a perfect family, but maybe a real one. Camille Ellington had lived most of her adult life with quiet dignity. She didn't believe in revenge. She didn't chase closure. And when Douglas Halford left the hospital room without so much as looking at the newborn in the bassinet, she didn't scream, beg, or follow him. She simply picked up her daughter, held her close, and began a life. It wasn't easy. There were days when the bills outweighed the groceries, nights when Naomi's asthma flared and Camille had to improvise breathing treatments with steam and prayer. But they survived, then they thrived. Now. Camille stood outside the revolving glass doors of Haltech, a simple scarf tied neatly around her neck, her coat buttoned to the collar. She had never planned to come here. But Naomi's voice had cracked on the phone the night before, just enough for Camille to hear the weight. And when your daughter's voice shakes, even as a grown woman, you go. Douglas met her in the lobby. He looked older than Camille remembered, not just in face, but in posture. She didn't smile, neither did he. "Camille," he said, voice tentative. "Douglas." There was a pause, and then she said, "Let's talk, somewhere quiet." He led her to his office, the same one Naomi had sat in weeks before. Camille walked slowly, her heels clicking on marble floors, her eyes taking in the empire her daughter now threatened to reshape. Once inside, Douglas offered her a seat. She remained standing. "I need 10 minutes, she said. "No interruptions, no lies." He nodded. She began, "You may think this is about Naomi, but it's not. It's about you. It's about the man who abandoned his child, not because he was poor, or sick, or young, but because he was afraid." Douglas looked down. Camille continued, her voice steady. "You let fear make you small, and then you built a life large enough to hide in." He flinched. She didn't stop. "Naomi doesn't want your apology. She wants your honesty. There's a difference. One is easy. The other changes things." "I'm trying," Douglas said softly. "Try harder." She finally sat, folding her hands in her lap. "You may not realize this, but Naomi's entire childhood was built around your absence. Every choice she made, every school, every competition, every internship was stitched together with the thread of proving she didn't need you." Douglas swallowed, "And she still found her way here." Camille nodded. "Because she's strong, because she's relentless, and because she was tired of wondering who you were from a distance." He looked up, eyes glassy. "I wish I could go back." Camille leaned forward. "You can't, but you can go forward. And this time, don't walk out." That afternoon, Camille met Naomi at a small cafe near Union Square. They sat outside, wrapped in coats, sipping warm tea under cloud-gray skies. Naomi looked tired, not physically but emotionally. Camille reached across the table and took her hand. "You did what I never could," she said gently. "You stood in front of him." Naomi looked away. "I don't even know why anymore. I wanted to confront him, but now I'm just exhausted." "That's grief," Camille said. "Not just for what you lost, but for the hope you still carry." Naomi didn't reply. Camille added softly, "You let a little girl into your life." Naomi's eyes filled. Sophie's. "Beautiful." "She's your sister, I know," Naomi whispered, "but I feel like a trespasser in her world." Camille shook her head. "You're not trespassing. You're reclaiming space that always belonged to you." Back at Haltech, Douglas finally opened the envelope Naomi had left. Inside was the old photo Naomi as a newborn, bundled in pink, Camille's tired but glowing face beside her, and the letter, Camille's letter. His eyes moved over the words slowly, like someone reading an ancient language for the first time. "She doesn't ask for anything because she learned not to." The line gutted him. He folded the paper, placed it in the top drawer of his desk, and pressed the intercom. "Janine," he said to his assistant, "clear the rest of my afternoon. I need to write something." That night, Douglas sat at his desk at home, typing slowly. Each sentence took effort, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew exactly what had to be said, and how little he deserved to be heard. He printed it, folded it, slipped it into an envelope addressed simply Naomi. When Naomi received it the next morning, she opened it cautiously. "Inside, I once thought being a father was about control, protecting, providing, steering. But I understand now that the truest form of fatherhood is presence. I wasn't there for you, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope, in time, I can be the kind of man you're not ashamed to be connected to. You were never invisible to the world, Naomi. Only to me. And that was my greatest failure. If you ever want to talk, I'll be there. If not, I'll still be there." Douglas Naomi folded the letter and set it beside her keyboard. She didn't cry. But something in her finally loosened. And when Sophie called that night to ask if they could have hot chocolate together on Sunday, Naomi said yes without hesitation, not because things were fixed, but because they had finally started. Monday morning began with a bombshell. It didn't come from Naomi. It didn't come from Camille. It came from a leaked press release that had not yet been approved, forwarded anonymously to 2 journalists and 1 activist blog that specialized in corporate accountability. Haltech CEO resigns amid allegations of nepotism, internal fraud, and hidden paternity ties within 3 hours. It was trending. Within 6, Haltech stock had dropped 8%. By noon, every major outlet had picked up the headline. By 3 p.m., Reporters were swarming the lobby, and by evening, Douglas Halford's world was no longer just unraveling quietly. It was collapsing in public. Naomi found out the way most of the world did through a news app alert while sipping her second coffee of the day. She froze as she read the headline. Her name wasn't in the body of the article, yet, but it was only a matter of time. She called Camille. Her mother's voice was calm but low. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," Naomi admitted. "I didn't leak it, I know." Camille said, "But the world doesn't care about who did what. They care about the story they can sell." At Haltech, the executive floor was a war zone. Legal teams gathered behind closed doors. The board released a placeholder statement. "We are aware of ongoing developments and are taking them seriously. Haltech remains committed to transparency, integrity, and our global client base. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. And at the center of it all was Douglas Halford, no longer in command, but not yet gone." He stood in his office, staring down at the street where cameras now pointed up at him. Elaine entered quietly. "They're calling it a legacy scandal," she said. He nodded. "I thought if I kept it buried long enough, it would fade." Elaine crossed her arms. "Truth doesn't rot, it ferments, and now everyone's drunk on the fallout." Douglas gave a bitter laugh. "I never wanted this to touch Sophie," Elaine replied softly, "but you touched Naomi first, and left a bruise that spread." Lauren Vance wasn't gloating. He was calculating. From his private office, he was already in talks with investors, positioning himself as the responsible adult ready to stabilize the company. But one thing gnawed at him: Naomi hadn't spoken publicly. No interviews, no statements. That scared him, because if she did, she could burn the whole system down. And that kind of silence meant she wasn't just reacting, she was thinking. Naomi spent the afternoon on a rooftop with her godmother, Tasha, one of Camille's oldest friends, a retired journalist who had seen more takedowns than most senators. "Don't let them force you into their narrative," Tasha said, lighting a clove cigarette with a silver Zippo. "If you speak now, it's defense. If you wait, it's choice." Naomi stared out over the city. "They're painting me as the scandal." Tasha shrugged. "Because you're the variable they didn't control." Naomi turned to her. "What do I do?" "You ask yourself what matters most, clearing your name or building your future, because the two are not always the same." Naomi exhaled. "I want both." Tasha smiled. "Then speak. But do it on your terms. In your time. With your voice." By the end of the week, Douglas submitted his formal resignation. No press conference, no farewell tour, just a typed letter, a final statement to the board, and one handwritten note left in Naomi's internal mailbox. "I'm sorry the world found out like this. You deserved better, you always did." Naomi folded the note. She didn't cry, but she didn't throw it away either. A week later, Naomi stood in front of Haltech's ethics board, not as an accused, but as a consultant. The company was undergoing a full internal audit, and her findings from Sector 5 had held up under scrutiny. She'd been cleared of all impropriety. In fact, her early detection had saved the company millions. Lauren, however, had been suspended pending investigation. Someone traced the original leak to a burner laptop left logged into a cloud file with his fingerprints all over it. Naomi hadn't exposed him. He'd exposed himself, as cowards often do. That night, Naomi returned home to find a small package outside her apartment door. Inside, a copy of the hospital photo, a gold chain with two pendants, one etched with N, the other with a tiny telescope. No note. But she knew who it was from. And this time, the gesture didn't feel like guilt. It felt like effort, maybe late, maybe imperfect, but still effort. She hung the necklace by the window, where it caught the light. Then she sat at her desk, opened a new file, and began writing. Not a report, not a statement, but a story, her own. Because while everyone else was chasing headlines, Naomi was busy writing legacy. 3 months later, the world had mostly moved on. Headlines faded, Stocks stabilized. New leadership stepped in at Haltech. PR agencies spun redemption stories. Investors went back to watching numbers instead of people. But for Naomi Ellington, the aftershocks were personal, not just professional. She hadn't returned to Haltech, not because she couldn't, because she chose not to. Sometimes us walking away was an act of power, not retreat. Instead, she'd accepted a fellowship at a nonprofit tech incubator, mentoring young women of color in cybersecurity and ethical design. She worked out of a sunlit office in Brooklyn now, walls filled with sticky notes, algorithms, and affirmations. One read, "Power without presence is noise. Presence without fear is freedom." She had written it during the week she decided not to retaliate but to rise. Camille came by the new office one afternoon with tea and a raised eyebrow. "Still not unpacked, I see." Naomi grinned. "I like clean spaces. Less clutter, less ghosts." Camille sat on the windowsill. "You don't talk about him much anymore." Naomi shrugged. "I don't need to." "Do you think he still checks the news about you?" Naomi paused. "Maybe. But I hope not out of guilt." Out of pride, Naomi looked out the window. "I think curiosity, that's enough." Camille smiled. Then she added, "Sophie's birthday is next weekend. She asked if you're coming." Naomi's expression softened. "Of course I am. She texted me her theme this year. It's Space Queens and Star Sisters." "She assigned me Saturn," Camille laughed. "Fitting. You've got rings of resilience." At the party, Sophie wore a glittery crown and explained the planets to each guest with serious precision. When Naomi arrived in a navy jumpsuit and a silver scarf wrapped like planetary rings, Sophie screamed with delight. "You remembered I take my assignments seriously," Naomi said, twirling. Elaine handed her a cup of cider, smiling warmly. "You didn't have to come," she said, "but I wanted to." Naomi replied. Douglas stood off to the side, watching. This time, he didn't avoid her. He approached slowly, cautiously, like someone returning to a sacred space they once damaged. "Hi," he said. "Hi." Naomi answered, "You look happy." "I am." He nodded. "I know I can't change what I did, but I've been showing up. For Sophie, for Elaine. It's not perfect. But it's honest now." Naomi looked at him. "I'm not here because I forgive you. Douglas, I'm here because I love my sister. I understand." She took a slow breath, "But I do appreciate that you finally came out of hiding." He smiled faintly. "You brought the light." She turned toward Sophie, who was holding court with her friends under a galaxy of paper lanterns. "No," Naomi said quietly. She did. Later that night, Naomi sat in her Brooklyn apartment, curled up in a blanket, sipping tea as the city breathed outside her window. She scrolled through photos from the party. One stopped her, a candid shot Elaine had taken. Sophie beaming, Naomi mid-laugh, Douglas in the background, watching them both with something like awe. Naomi saved it, then opened a new email draft, subject for the record to herself. "I was never meant to be hidden. I was never meant to be quiet, but I was taught that silence protects people, and now I know truth protects better. I'm not what they feared. I'm what they missed." The story was never about revenge. It was about return, not to him, but to myself. N.E. She hit save as draft. Maybe she'd publish it someday. Or maybe it would just live there. A reminder that some legacies aren't written in press releases or obituaries. They're written in presence, in healing, in the rooms where people choose to stay, even after the lights flicker. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with return, not to the person who hurt you, but to the self that was never meant to be hidden. Naomi didn't burn her father's legacy to the ground. She stood taller than it. She protected her voice, embraced her sister, and rewrote the ending without permission. This wasn't just a tale of a white man's guilt or a black woman's brilliance. It was a reminder being seen matters. Being chosen matters more. And no child, no matter their skin, their silence, or their strength, deserves to be erased. To everyone who's ever been overlooked, excluded, or told they weren't part of the story, you are. You always were. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect, or if it made you feel seen, please give it a like, leave us a comment about what moment hit you the hardest, and subscribe for more stories that call out injustice and celebrate quiet power. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep telling the truth, even if your voice shakes.